Welcome to Atypical Kids Mindful Parents podcast, the neurodiversity affirming parenting podcast that helps parents feel less alone. I'm Kate Lynch, a mindfulness coach and parent of an amazing atypical kid. I interview parents and experts who share my mission to create a kinder, more inclusive future. You can look forward to grounding practices, relatable parenting stories, and groundbreaking strategies. If you long to embody mindfulness and compassion in your parenting life, follow us here for connection, strategies, and support. Let's go on this journey together.
I never quite know what's going to occur when I start speaking with my guests. Sometimes the topic end up being different from what I expected, or we go in a completely different direction, or we go much deeper into something than I had ever hoped we would. Sometimes I like to split our conversations into multiple podcasts. This is an example of that. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ryan Rose Weaver. Please review the podcast so that other parents can find us and feel more connected, less alone. This is my friend Ryan Rose Weaver. She is a writer, educator, consultant, and parent to a twice exceptional child. She's taught hundreds of students across New York City. So I'm really excited to talk with you about intensive caregiving seasons. Do you want to start by telling us the story of when your kid was being evaluated?
Yes, that was definitely the soil out of which my current creative practice grew. I was a classroom educator for many years and made the decision to step out of the classroom because I was burned out and was hoping that fall was going to be a season of respite and long walks in the woods. And there was some of that. But my son was 3 and starting a Montessori school for the first time after a honeymoon period, things started to go haywire. He had a teacher who was struggling to meet his needs. He was running away when it was time to do the Montessori things, putting beads on string and doing art activities. He was really resistant to those. He was also struggling during transitions and lashing out at his classmates and garnering a lot of negative attention. This was surprising to us because when he was at home, we observed him to be bright, steady, energetic, but never aggressive. And we had a lot of fun with art materials at home. So we didn't know what was going on. Early childhood educators, maybe some are familiar with sensory integration issues, which is what we discovered he had. Some are on the lookout for fine motor struggles, which is also what he had. But some don't necessarily know about those things. And they're really just looking at the behaviors and the symptoms of those struggles and saying, he just needs consequences. So day after day, my son was getting consequences at this school. It was a very old school place. He was sitting out at recess, which of course, when kids need to move, yes, looking at your face, it sets my teeth on edge. The sitting out at recess as a consequence, because we know that kids, if they're acting out in these ways, often it's because their needs for gross motor movement, for proprioceptive input are not being met. And so you're taking away the one thing that would actually help regulate them as a consequence for them being dysregulated. They were calling me every day. We don't know what to do. And I said, look, if you're not sure how to observe my child and how to go upstream and look at what's triggering these behaviors, then why don't I go ahead and initiate the evaluation process, and we'll have people from the district come in and take a look at him if this is truly purely behavioral. If somehow with my 2 education degrees, I have failed him that thoroughly as a parent that he's just a bad kid, he's just a bad seed. Okay, then, but I don't really believe in bad parenting. I just didn't buy it. So after walking dozens, if not more than that, parents through the IEP process as a literacy specialist and a classroom educator, I became that parent who was swimming through a moat of paperwork and trying to organize all of these meetings so that he could get a neuropsych and he could be observed by an occupational therapist. And lo and behold, after We had his meeting. It turned out that he was in the second percentile for fine motor development, which meant that when he was being asked to put beads on strings, that was incredibly hard for him, potentially impossible. And that's why he was ready to flip a table. And he had such sensory needs that to be in a loud transition and have people touching him and coats on and off and all the things that we know are triggers for children with sensory issues, he just was unable to be successful in that environment. That was towards the end of the year. We were really lucky that we got that evaluation at a time where school was about to be done with anyway, and we were able to use that evaluation to get a completely different setting for him the following year. He went through his pre-K 4 year with an IEP in place, all kinds of services. It was wonderful. He was declassified at the end of this last school year. So he no longer has an IEP. I know that's not everybody's story, and I don't necessarily consider that a success.
He's doing okay.
Yes. Yeah. He's having some of the same issues now that he's in kindergarten. But what's wonderful about being in a K-12 setting is that teachers tend to have a lot more tools when they approach kids with sensory issues. And unfortunately, it's teacher by teacher, right?
It's teacher by teacher. Some teachers have been teaching for a long time, but haven't been keeping up with their continuing education. Some teachers may have come through the education, but they don't have the real world classroom experience. Most teachers are still not that up on the latest science and research as far as child development. This has been my experience. Ocean's Elementary School was fantastic, but there were still teachers doing that thing of taking away recess.
Yes. And it's not a best practice.
No, it's even in the handbook. Like, that's not okay, but they were still doing that. So.
Yeah, and it can be really hard to advocate as one parent when you're confronted with those policies. Some teachers lean more on how they were taught or how they were raised, and they are less so using evidence and research to drive their instruction.
How did that experience lead to the work you are doing with parents now?
So during that season, I was closing the gap between what my son needed and what the school could provide. Mm-hmm. There were days where he could go for maybe 1 or 2 hours and then he had to come home. My plan for that period of my life was that I would take a few months off and then I would look for consulting work because I've always had a side project or somebody who needs lesson plans or curriculum written. During that season, it was not possible for me to have a consistent client because I couldn't promise them the hours. I couldn't promise them the attention that they needed. I had little tiny bits of time here and there. And I felt that if I didn't have something besides focusing on my son's experience in school, that would not serve him well because I would just be hyper fixated on his experience in school. I didn't want that to become my entire personality. And I also wouldn't have any place where I could move the energy in a different way. So really my creative practices grew out of a survival instinct in terms of knowing what I know about self-regulation. As an educator and a parent, I needed to apply some of those things to my own wellness. One of the avenues of creativity for me has always been movement. And I started really looking for places where I could dance or do yoga in more creative ways. I was really reaching out for community and Sangha in terms of movement. I went to dance church in Brooklyn after reading Angela Garb's Essential Labor, and it was so fun. And it just reminded me that there was more to me than being a parent. I think we need to balance out our parent identities with the other dimensionalities of our being so as not to hang our whole self-worth on that. Those are also not competitive modalities. Who cares if I'm the best dancer at dance church? You're just literally flailing around in a dark room. It was about cultivating self-worth. It wasn't about my career achievement or my child's school achievement.
Yeah. Can I read this quote from something you wrote to me? It can be so hard to find the time for our own self-tending practices and creativity. Sometimes our atypical kids genuinely need us to drop what we're doing and be there to help them solve something atypically difficult. But there are so many good reasons to come back to something that lets us be in a flow state, even if we feel
guilty or it's hard to stay consistent with it. Can we talk about the consistency and the guilt?
Mhm. And they go hand in hand. It can be hard to be consistent with something that you feel guilty about.
And what about feeling guilty about doing something that feels quote unquote selfish in the first place?
We were talking about how many teachers lean on what they were taught or some modeled rather than basing their practice on what's research backed or evidence based. And I think we can parent in those ways too. If we had a parent who modeled self sacrifice, I'm the child of two social workers. So I saw a lot of self sacrifice and not always enough self tending. If that's what we saw, that's what we take to be normal. And we don't necessarily critically examine that. It's meeting the guilt with, is this true? This is a thought. Is it really true that if I go to yoga, that's bad for my child? The other creative practice that I have is writing. Is it really true that if I take the time to write about my experience, is that really bad for my child? I think it's normal to have those guilty thoughts because they come from our conditioning. How could we not? It's important to use the evidence available to us to challenge those thoughts and to develop a new way forward that's more appropriate for us. A lot of the brain-based research on burnout and tending to our nervous systems has come out since the 2010s. If you've been a busy parent and a busy professional during that time, you're not necessarily reading those books until you're already burnt out. I really love the book Burnout by the Nagoski sisters.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things they talk about is how essential it is to allow ourselves to be in a flow state or do other things to move the stress energy inside of us, because not only is it hard to parent when you're stressed out, you're more reactive, you might raise your voice more, or you might shut down more, you might be on your phone more. We all have our different ways of being reactive. It can also make you unwell. I don't mean to say that all illness is rooted in poor self-care, because I think that's not evidence-based, but it is true that chronic stress over time has these deleterious effects that we can see in the research. Self-care isn't selfish. It's a cliche, but it's one that's borne out by the research.
I loved that book as well, although it made me mad at the patriarchy. This rage was coming out and this frustration was coming out at the way things are. I love the way they put the practices right up front rather than making you read through everything before getting the practices. And I wonder if we could just do one of those really quick practices like shaking right now. Start with your hands, shaking them a little bit, and your shoulders and your face and your head, and see what can jiggle and shake whatever can shake. And if you're listening to this and you're walking around or you're standing up, you could jump up and down a little bit. You can shake off to one side and off to the other. Shake above your head, shake down, and then pause. It doesn't take much.
A great practice for after an IEP meeting.
Hell yeah.
I used to rage garden.
Rage garden. I love that. That's a great idea. Another thing I always try to remember to do after an IEP meeting is write a list of my child's strengths, because it's so deficit based and we have to come from that angle in this current system to advocate for our kids. It can leave a really yucky taste in my mouth. So afterward, I almost write a love letter to my kid. And it's not for him, it's for me to remind myself of all the strengths that I haven't been able to focus on during that meeting.
That's brilliant and really thoughtful. A lot of parents would benefit from that. The way that I would explain it to parents when preparing for an IEP meeting is, look, here's how I see it. This is like a court proceeding. I am your lawyer, and my job is to get as many services for your child as possible at no cost to you. I have to make a case for that by marshaling all the evidence for why they need it. It is really hard to listen to this evidence. It is very hard to present this evidence. And I want you to know that this is not the wholeness of your child, and this is not all I see in them. We are here to do a job. And very often there would be some aftercare of, hey, again, I just want to remind you, we had to put your child in a box in this meeting, and that's not all that they are. And it is so hard. And for my partner, who has not been through a million IEP meetings, the process has been very difficult. He's someone who was a good student all his life, He was always able to meet expectations placed on him. He's a white man. He's more neurotypical presenting than my son and I. For him, it has been a journey to unlearn this notion that the reality of your child is what teachers say they are. It's not a mirror.
We've had some wonderful advocates and teachers in the public school system. I've never once had any teacher or any advocate say what you just said. It feels so healing to hear that. And it also is like this sense of longing and what if. I just want to send that, what you just said, to every teacher I've ever known and have them internalize some part of it. It would have helped so much. I didn't feel so on the other side from teachers.
Yeah.
Like I would go in with this idea of partnership and come out with a feeling of betrayal, alienation, or confusion. So thank you for saying that. Those parents are so lucky to have had the privilege of working with you.
Yeah, I'm really hearing that sense of hurt and betrayal. And there's so much vulnerability that we have as parents when we place our children in their hands.
Yeah.
It's teacher by teacher in terms of how they handle that vulnerability or whether they even see it. I know that before I was a parent, I didn't see it as much as I do now. I don't know that I was as profoundly aware of the vulnerability. It just felt really important to align on these are the talking points. This is not the whole story, but this is what we're going to say. And here's the reason why. It just felt like a basic sign of respect to parents. But it is surprising to see how many different views there are among educators about their relationship to parents and their responsibilities to parents and children. There's not one view.
That word respect is so huge. That's such a huge part of my core values. It's essential in the relationship. And that's something that I suggest to parents is to like really develop that respectful relationship before you ever get anywhere near the IEP meeting, because the IEP meeting is not really supposed to be this time for getting to know people and making a lot of changes and decisions. Is we all are on the same page and we know what to expect and we're just going to hash out the details of it.
In an integrated brain state, the way I feel when I come out of yoga or after I've written something, I can hear almost anything, receive it, partner with people, compromise, and see their perspective. And when I'm not in that place, it is very hard to hear other perspectives. It's fight or flight, protect myself, armor up, guard my heart. I think IEP meetings, unfortunately, are spaces where maybe the person leading the meeting from the district is integrated because it's just another day at the office for them. But for parents, it's a very vulnerable, scary day. I wish it weren't, but that's the truth. And for teachers, often it's a vulnerable and scary day because it's their practice that's being examined under a microscope. You prepare your list of all these different ways that you're supporting this child. And you come into the meeting, there's a person from the district who is looking over everything you've done for a child I love at this point, who I would do anything for. I will have done almost everything in my power. And that person from the district will often say, did you try this? Did you try this? What about this? What about this? And any parent of a child with special needs knows what it feels like. Immediately, you're on your back foot. Because on the one hand, very often the answer to have you tried is like, of course I fucking tried. I've tried everything, craniosacral therapy, everything short of an exorcism I have tried. And very often as a teacher, you feel that way as well. I'm aware that is something that sometimes children with this label benefit from. I don't think it's appropriate for this child because I know them well and this is what I've chosen to do with them. Or yes, in an ideal world where I don't have 90 students, certainly I would be doing all those things. I'm feeling shame because I am not enough to meet the gap between what this school is providing and what this child needs, right? So it's the same shame that parents feel when they can't be everything that their child needs. Teachers feel that shame too. Very often, even as a lawyer and not the client, you're being called before a judge and the judge is deeming you deficient as well. And that can be so hard. And that's not in any way to defend how teachers show up to IEP meetings. If they're not behaving respectfully, that's not okay. That's a school-wide issue where it's like maybe they need a minute to meditate before they go into an IEP meeting, or they need more preparation for those meetings so that they're not so scary. But I wish they weren't so hard, is the bottom line.
It does help to look at it from that perspective. I remember one time I was given awareness that teachers don't always tell parents the truth because they're afraid of parents and they might tell them what they want to hear. I was blown away by that. What? How is that? Of course, I want to hear the truth. Of course, I want
Yeah.
to be treated like we're on the same team. How can we support each other? My child can only benefit from us being on the same team. Yeah, I never really thought that anyone at the school would be afraid of me. I'm coming in, I'm the one who doesn't have the degree. Everyone else knows each other. It's their workplace, and I'm coming in as an outsider.
Yeah.
And I'm the only one who has to literally live with the repercussions of what happens in the IEP meeting.
Yes, absolutely. It's a piece of your heart that we're talking about. There's so much vulnerability in those moments that is going unnamed. And I think what we're talking about is just how much harm that can cause and how much more compassion is needed. Centering kids and parents. As I said, this is our profession and this is part of the job. This profession does have many nice, sweet people who are not confrontational. And over time, having a non-confrontational approach turns out doesn't necessarily solve all problems. Sometimes you need self-compassion because you need to treat yourself tenderly. And sometimes you need self-compassion because you need to be assertive in a situation where that might be hard for you. That is also a skill that schools and districts could help to develop in teachers, rather than aggressively communicating or communicating in a way that is nice but not necessarily kind because it's not clear. I think parents deserve honesty.
You mentioned yoga. The first two yamas in yoga are ahimsa, non-harming, kindness for both self and all beings, and satya, truthfulness. Satya is always filtered through ahimsa. Is it true, you asked, and is it kind? Is there a way to say this necessary and honest thing in a way that it is received and then everyone can stay on that safe and social plane of connection? I mean, I've rarely gone into an IEP meeting not activated, not in either flight or fight.
Yes.
Very rarely.
I've walked into meetings on that plane, and I have very rarely walked out on that plane.
Having that
And I think
conversation beforehand that you described would do it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that teachers can be really afraid of parents' reactivity because, of course, we're more likely to be reactive when we're talking about our children. And they're not claiming the agency they have to support those parents working with the reactivity before the big game, so to speak. We work with children who really benefit from previewing.
You were previewing for the parent.
Yes.
I always
Yes.
appreciate that.
When I'm teaching, I'm thinking about students that might be more reactive or fearful to speak, and previewing can really help them participate more. They get to have these lived experiences of being brave and contributing ideas to the classroom. Previewing can also help parents who may face language or cultural barriers to understand what is going to happen and to feel more empowered rather than already feeling one down, because that's not fair. I have such privilege going into an IEP meeting, having been in many. I possess white privilege. I have multiple graduate degrees. Many of the parents I've worked with, English as a second language, they're waiting for the translation. While they're waiting for the translation, they're reading the body language in the room. They're trying to ascertain, okay, this is what the teacher said, but is the translator changing the language in some way? Are they being honest with me? And there's just so many layers to that experience that can make it vulnerable.
It's
Yeah.
so
Okay.
important and really essential, this idea of mutual respect and ways to connect and communicate, more sense of safety between parents and teachers who have the child's best interests in mind. It's a really
Yeah.
helpful perspective. Is there anything
And I
else you'd
think,
like to say about that?
yes, I think that the connecting thread that I'm seeing in everything that we've talked about is really about creating rituals. There's the rituals you have with yourself, right? Doing a self-compassion practice, writing, movement. Those are things we have the power to do, whether we're caregivers on the parent side or helping professionals or both. Those things are really important, as we've discussed, because they allow us to move from fight or flight into a more open and receptive place. So at least we're not bringing additional reactivity to whatever difficult situation we're going into. And then there's these relational rituals. For example, creating moments as a parent or a teacher when you know that an IEP meeting is coming to just check in. I create those moments as a teacher, but parents can also advocate for that. Can we have a phone call, or can I come by? Can we just sit together and talk through what we think the best strategies might be in that conversation? Perhaps bringing in that piece that you shared, which is the relational piece you have with your child, saying after an IEP meeting, I really like to come back to contemplating the relationship I have with my child and really reminding myself of their strengths. Do you think as a teacher you could support me with making sure that list is up to date of all the things that you're seeing, all the gifts that my child brings to the classroom community, the gifts that they bring not just as a student, but as a friend? That's really important, I think, to ask about. And within that container of the IEP meeting, maybe the practice is just feet on the ground, all the wonderful things you do with parents, imagining that somebody has your back.
Yeah.
If it's not the teachers in the room, knowing that there are other people who are in your community, imagining them with you. It's really a favorite of mine that you do. And then knowing that there's going to be some aftercare. And that's something that we as parents can give to ourselves and can give to our children. When kids get older, they start going to the IEP meeting. So certainly there's some needed aftercare in those situations. But we need it as parents, as you said, to remind ourselves that an IEP meeting is not a mirror. A report card is not a mirror. These are snapshots in time. And I have plenty of shots on my phone of me parenting that are not from my most flattering angle. So if I took that to be the wholeness of me, I would really be struggling with my self-worth. But it's not a mirror. It's just a snapshot in time.
It is tempting to see those moments where we struggle as parents as the whole picture, those moments of feeling really stuck or new struggles. There's always something new as they grow and mature. Ocean sat in on one IEP meeting so far. It went okay. I'm wondering if there's anything that you would suggest to parents who are at that point where their kid is ready for that milestone, because he's in high school now and I'm sure he's going to be requested and required to attend the meeting. Do you have any words of wisdom?
Philosophically, the idea of including a child in their own IEP meeting is admirable. They should have a voice, particularly as they grow. I taught middle school, so we will be working on the high school transition, starting to really help them think about adulthood and what that's going to be like for them. At the same time, I can imagine a neurodivergent student finding those proceedings incredibly boring. I can imagine a student with rejection sensitive dysphoria finding that meeting traumatic. I think parents should really just continue to be advocates for their children. I think it's important to ask them what they want to do and to have that pre-meeting with your adolescent. Like, this is what this meeting is for. This is what you might hear. This is maybe not going to feel great, and inviting them to make a choice. What would you like to do? And that's a strategy I use a lot with adolescents, framing the choice. I don't tend to make choices for teenagers. It doesn't tend to work anyway. And so very often it's framing the choice. It's a strategy I use with my 5-year-old. Would you prefer the blue cup or the green cup. But it's a teenage version of that. When I was in the classroom, I was the English teacher that all of the kids came to with their boyfriend-girlfriend struggles. What should I do? Should I break up with them? I don't know. In most cases, my internal answer would be like, yes, you're 13. You don't need this drama in your life. But what I would say is that if you choose to remain in this relationship, here are some considerations. If you choose to end this relationship, here are some considerations. And then I would often try to include an embarrassing story about one of my breakups or one of my silly exes or whatever. And they're riveted
Oh,
because
yeah.
here I am in my full-on teacher drag. I'm probably wearing a blazer or something. They can't believe I've ever done anything wrong. And so they're like, wait, what? You did that? So I try to keep those stories handy. And framing the choice with an IEP meeting, you could tell a story about a meeting that you really hated or that you thought would be a good idea and you didn't love it, and just how you've learned to evaluate the containers that you consent to be inside and the ones you decline to be in, or the ones where you know you have to go. How do you prepare yourself if you know that it's going to be difficult for you? Framing out how adults come to make those choices. Because honestly, like going back to the caregiver and self-care conversation, a lot of us don't even think about that.
Yeah.
We just trudge on into these spaces rather than thinking in the more trauma-informed way, like, I actually have choices.
One of those choices is to stop and do a self-empathy practice. It does remind me that I have choices, even if I feel really trapped, backed into a corner, pausing and just ask myself, like, how am I feeling? Getting as clear and granular on that as possible. Something that I'm feeling in my body, and what do I most need? There's something that will actually serve me in this moment. That's a practice I do several times a day. It takes no time, especially if we're okay not having an answer. Just asking the question, even if there's no certainty of, I don't know how I feel or I don't know what I need. Just keep asking the question.
That's so beautiful. Being okay with not knowing the answer is such a beautiful permission to receive, because we've been in fight or flight for such a long time, and we can go
Yeah.
through full seasons of that as caregivers. It's common to hear from parents like, I would ask for help, but I don't even know what I need. Or I would have a hobby, but it's been so long since I had any time. I don't even know what I like anymore. I think what I hear you saying is, could you create a space to wait and listen?
Yeah.
And just
And it
wait
could
and
be
listen.
the length of a breath.
What do you do with your body in those moments?
The moments
Like
where I'm
checking in. Yeah, I just read a book called Setting Boundaries That Stick by Julie Shore. It was recommended by a therapist friend. She talks about reflecting on how it is that you want to show up personally, but also how you want to show up relationally. And when you start feeling yourself pulled into reactivity, I actually have kind of a temper, particularly when I'm feeling protective of a child. So in IEP meetings, it can be exciting to see what happens. That is a euphemism. But she suggests having a mudra, something that you can do with your hands
Yeah.
that reminds you of how you are committing to showing up. So for me, the mudra that I use is one hand holding the other hand. I've been doing a lot of Zen-based meditation, so that's the mudra anyway. But I want to be supportive, but I also need to be supported.
Oh, I love that.
And if I feel like, yes, I'm being adequately supported, but I'm stuck in the I, me, mine story, I need to remind myself to be supportive of other people in the space if I'm feeling regulated enough to do that. Very often, it's checking in with myself and going, oh, I'm not angry. I just feel vulnerable. I don't feel supported. I need to stop and ask for some support. And it might just be like, I'm getting triggered in this meeting. I'm going to go to the bathroom. Do you go to the bathroom in an IEP meeting? Who's going to say no? Maybe I'll go shake in the bathroom and allow myself to feel supported by the things I know to do. Very often it's one of those things, like reminding myself to be supportive, but also more often I'm feeling unsupported and I need to do what you've suggested, right? Have that practice of what do I most need right now?
Can we practice for a moment?
I'd love to.
Okay. I call it tranquility mudra when we're
Mm,
resting our palms, both palms face up and the thumb tips touching, resting in your lap.
mm,
If you're in a
mm.
position where you can rest your hands in your lap, both palms facing up, one in the other. I love that. Supportive and supported at the same time. And if your thumb tips can find each other, create that kind of energetic loop or connection, then rest into that. If you have something behind you, you can lean back into it. Actually put your back against a wall or a chair or in a corner, because that can give you that somatic experience of being supported at your back. And I'll invite you to think of someone in your life, maybe presently, maybe in your past, who sees you, who's there for you, who has respect for your whole self, with all parts of you, really knows you and has unconditional positive regard for who you are. You don't have to be someone else around them. You can trust them not only to tell you the truth, but to tell you the truth in a kind way, to be there for you. If you're struggling to identify someone, you can expand your reach toward fictional characters, symbols of faith, pets. Sometimes I choose Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he wasn't perfect. He ran away from a lot, but I feel like he would have my back and he would have that fierce compassion no matter what. Sometimes it's my best friend. You can imagine literally leaning back and this person having your back. And you can feel the strength from them. On your next inhale, imagine that you're breathing in through the back of your heart. You're receiving that strength. As if your back can inhale, even though it can't. And just let the exhale happen whenever. So you're receiving through the back of your heart. The exhale is passive. And as we start to feel a stronger sense of support at our back, we may feel a little melting in our heart in the front, like a softness, a willingness to allow that vulnerability to show. When we're really feeling protected and supported, the fear can start to melt away. There is probably going to be lingering vigilance, some lingering tension, but some of that can start to unravel as you continue to receive that strength through the back of your heart. Do this until you feel really filled up. That sense of being supported is the dominant sense, and you're overflowing with support. That's when you might start to think about what's happening when you exhale. And if there's someone in particular who needs your support, like a child, you can think of them in front of you. If you've still got the strong, compassionate guide at your back, the fierce compassion supporting you, breathing in that strength through the back of your heart. Breathe out through the front of your heart generously, that strength to share it with the vulnerable one in front of you. Each of us has the powerful and the vulnerable within us. And each of us has those in our life who are powerful and who are vulnerable. We don't have to be everything to anyone. We need to be able to receive support in order to share support. So I'm inhaling strong back through the back of my heart. Exhaling soft front through the front of my heart. Meeting vulnerability with vulnerability, meeting softness with softness, with love, with unconditional, positive regard. And you can get to the point where your inhale is even with your exhale. Inhaling back of your heart. Exhaling, beaming through the front of your heart. Inhaling, receiving. Exhaling, giving. All of your gifts, your strengths. Gratitude to the back of your heart. Generosity through the front of your heart. And as you practice this, it can get easier and easier, just like the self empathy. It gets easier to do it in a couple of breaths. Over time, start to weave it into moments where you feel stuck, trapped, vulnerable, afraid. Thank you for practicing that with me, Ryan.
Beautiful.
You can find Ryan on Substack at Ryan Rose Weaver and on Instagram, Ryan Rose Weaver. I will put the links in the show notes, of course, but I wanted you to hear it as well. Thank you for joining Atypical Kids Mindful Parents. I really appreciate you walking alongside me